Scene 2, take 1. Whenever you're ready.
My name is Don Ross, and I have been a composer and performer for many years, since the late 80s. I've been at it full time. My background is kind of interesting, I guess. My father's a Scottish immigrant, and he met my Indigenous mother in Montreal. Well, I'm really proud to be a member of the Millbrook Mi'kmaq First Nation. I've never actually lived on the reserve. My parents did. My mother, of course, grew up there, and then later in life, she and my dad decided to move back. So I started visiting really regularly. I got to know the community a bit, and the chief and council, and it's a really good group of people. Over the years, they've been very supportive for not just myself, but they've helped my daughters with their education. So I really feel like I owe a lot to the community, especially since my wife and I decided first to move back to Nova Scotia, and now here to Prince Edward Island. You know, it's all Mi'kmaq-y. It feels there was just always something magical about this place. I think my music has been influenced very much by where I've lived. I grew up in a francophone milieu, and I listened to a lot of musics that a lot of Anglo-Canadians and Americans would not necessarily have been familiar with. So I think that had a strong influence on me. But then I grew up in big cities, so it really opened me up to a whole lot of different musical influences. I did a bachelor's degree at York University in Toronto, and it was pretty incumbent that I start making money and having my own job. And then I applied and received a fairly major grant early on in my career in the late 80s, and I was finally able to say, okay, this is a sign that I am to quit the job, and happy to say I've never had a straight job since. Through a lot of my career, because I was traveling so much, I found geography and human beings were sort of the most predominant reasons for being inspired to write a tune. And one way that fortunately, this is kind of cool. This is a new method I use to write more in the last 10 years or so. I started recording my own albums. So sometimes what I do is I'll be writing a piece of music, and I'll come up with a bunch of ideas, and I'll just say to myself, okay, I'm just gonna freeform whatever comes to mind, and I just press play and record, and I'll just work on these ideas. I'll go back and listen to it and think, okay, well, idea 4 is pretty good, and idea 7 wasn't bad. And I'll start maybe editing those pieces together to see what they sound like. And I'll say, that's actually cool. And usually I'll say, okay, now I'll re-record it. Occasionally though, it might be 16 minutes long. I cut it down to 10. I think, well, 10's too long, but it's starting to glue together better. And I'll keep whittling away just with editing. So then I'd end up with a 4-minute, really cool tune. So that's a really nice new way of working that I wouldn't have been able to do earlier in my career. Launching a career in the music industry is a totally different landscape now than it was when I started, that's for sure. You know, when Napster happened, suddenly the bottom fell out of the recording industry, and it's never really recovered. In fact, it's gotten smaller and smaller. A couple of summers ago, I'm driving along with my wife. She's driving the car. I'm sitting there sort of moaning about how difficult it's getting. And she said, well, would you consider going back to school? And I said, well, only if I can find an online master's program in orchestration, for film, television. And yeah, as she's driving along, about 10 minutes later, I found the program that I ended up enrolling in. Ironically, even before my degree ended, I started getting offers to do film and television work, and it's been nonstop. I mean, I write more music now than I ever have, and it's become an everyday, full-time, very viable way to do it, and I'm really happy about that. I knew I'd been nominated for the Walter Carsen Prize, and I knew that the music side only comes up once every 4 years. So that's kind of interesting, because it's not an annual prize. And the judges are your peers. That to me almost means more than anything else about the whole thing, is that it feels like a doff of the cap from them, And that's a real privilege, because it makes you realize, okay, I don't just have fans, or I don't just have listeners or whatever. I also have people who are really discerning, who are making these decisions about things like this. On many levels, it's such an honor, really. I don't know what Canadians would do without organizations like the Council, because it's not just artists that benefit. It's, of course, the audiences that benefit the most, because Canada needs to have its own voice, its own culture, its own artistic activity. And if we don't invest in it, then it won't exist. So it's wonderful that in this day and age we have organizations like the Council, and that they are supported by governments and by population. It's great.